Hey everyone, Internet PC's book reader here. Today I want to talk about The Promise by Damon Galgut. The story of The Promise took place in South Africa that is still under apartheid law, following the Swart family. Amor, our main character, was a child in school when news about her mother's death reached her. They sent her back home along with a relative named Tani Marina. From their conversation, we know that they come from the Voortrekker, Dutch people who have come to colonize Africa and later on will be known as the Afrikaners, the people who established the infamous apartheid law. Meanwhile, in Johannesburg, Amor's brother Anton, who served in the military, just shot a defenseless woman when he was given news about his mother's death. So he had to return home. And together with Amor, her sister Astrid, and her father Main, they all gathered joined by the funeral. Her father Main had a retail park which features some mamba snakes, which kinda reminds me of one of Trevor Noah's stand-up bit about white people in a snake pit. This took quite a big part in his life. Now much older with a son and two daughters, he promised his wife in her dying bed that he'll give the small house at the back of their house to Salome, their black servant which has worked for the family since ages ago. She came with the house according to Amor's grandfather. But as time progresses and more of the family members are gone, the promise of the house goes unfulfilled. And that's the gist of the story: funeral, reunion, and an unfulfilled promise. The Schwartz family has such an interesting dynamic. Everyone seems to have their own life that is almost completely separate from the rest of the family since they are first introduced in the story. It feels like they're only truly united in a single moment when there's a death in the family, a funeral that forced them to reunite, and a gathering that always ends with another party where one of the family leaves. And with each decade pass, another family passes away, another reunion, and another party is set to go. The story starts with a mother funeral and ends with Anton leaving the family and the military, and in the second part, the story starts with the father funeral and ends with Amor leaving to Dunbar to become a nurse. And like a cycle of ends of a journey and starts of a journey, the story goes on like that. The story can also be heavy at times, of course, since in its very core, it's a story of reunion in the midst of one unifying thing about human: death. So there are themes of grieving, whether it's grieving for the loss of a loved one or just grieving because something has changed in a way that is permanent. A lot of the quotes of the story revolves around death and its effect. I'll give you a few examples. But in the meantime, there is the body, the horrible meaty fact of it. The thing that reminds everyone, even people who didn't care for the dead woman. And there are always a few of those, that one day they shall lie there too, just like her, emptied out of everything, merely a form, unable even to look at itself. And the mind recoils from its absence, cannot think of itself, not thinking, the coldest of voids. Numbers go on, but what does mathematics help? In any human life, there is really only one of everything. The dead are so much more predictable than the living, with their moods and humors. There are riddles with no answer in human speech, nor is he alone in thinking so, though not everyone craves silence in consequence. But it never felt too much thanks to the aspect of the story that is closer to humor that is dark and morbid. During these funerals, Amor is always picked up by someone in each event where the characters that picks her up always end up confessing too much of their insecurities to her, since to them she's a good listener. During the funeral of the mother at the start, Amor had her first period where she and Astrid had to skip parts of their mother burial because they need to take care of Amor's period. No one in the family ends up in a happy marriage because of one thing or another, not even Salome and her son. All of these are told in a 10-year time skip in between each funeral, where unlike a lot of other stories, you can really feel that time has progressed because of the time skips. In other story, for example, I know this is a cheap comparison, but this is the one that comes out of the top of my head. In the manhwa True Beauty, there's a time skip where the characters graduates from high school and goes on to work. But there's really no point to the time skip since the characters are still the same immature people before and after the time skip. But in this story, after the first decade when they met again, the oldest daughter Astrid is already married and got a twin. Meanwhile, Amor has moved to London. On the third reunion after another decade has passed, Astrid was divorced and remarried and has changed her last name. And the story doesn't over-explain about the decades in between, because a decade has passed, of course things change. They're barely the same person compared to who they are in this time skip, Some of it are changes that didn't happen and have rotted you on the inside, and some of them might be changes that you wish never happened. Let me give you 2 quotes. Astrid is a fearful person. Among other things, she's afraid of the dark, poverty, thunderstorm, getting fat, earthquakes, tidal wave, crocodile, the plagues, the future, the orderly structure of society coming undone, of being unloved, of always having been that way. She dislikes her whole body, as many of you do, but with special adolescent intensity, and it seems even more present than usual today, more thickly, heatedly present. And as the story progressed, this quote that described their youth changed along with time. The writing itself kinda reminds me of Cormac McCarthy writing, where there's no separation between internal monologue and character dialogue, but this book is more intense with sudden character perspective change. Here, for example, you've been following Amor, but then it changed suddenly to Main's perspective. Thankfully, it's a third-person narration, so you can still follow who the story is following, but it does need more concentration than usual. And as each decade goes in between this family reunion, you can also see the progress of not only them as character, but also South Africa. In a way, South Africa is as much of a character as the Swartz family. At the start of the story, through Amor's naivety and youth, we get to know more about the apartheid in South Africa, about how the family cannot give Salome the house even if they wanted to, because apartheid law prevents black people to live in their own home among the whites, on how black people are being captured without any trial, and how they need to carry passbook as a permit for them just to be there among the white, on how there's a resistance that throw rock to people with rifles because that's the only means they have to fight back against their oppressors. Then a decade later, after apartheid has ended for a few years, Anton, who was once a criminal that ran away from the military duty, can now be considered a hero for not staying in the military. Then another decade passed and South Africa has now been under democracy for a decade, but from Amor's work as a nurse, we know that there's an HIV epidemic going on there, just like the one that happened in America because of government incompetency. Then in the last decade of the story is around the end of Jacob Zuma's infamous last moment as a president, where electricity and water has somehow become a rare resource. And also because all the people that pass in the story all have different religion, with Rachel the mother being Jew, May the father being Christian, that the next two deaths come from a Catholic and an atheist, we get to explore these differences even further. In a way, although the story is about the family, but the progression of the story makes it unavoidable that it is also a story about the history that South Africa has gone through over the past 5 decades. That's why there are quotes like this in the book. Others have suffered way more than you have, though that's somehow true of every experience. In the end, all you can say is that you got through this far enough for things to change and become easier. No need to hide anymore, holding on, holding up, an old South African solution. Apartheid has failed, see? We die right next to each other now, in intimate proximity. It's just the living part we still have to work out. She has learned, or perhaps has always known, that if you want to move forward, it's best not to look back. All she's done since leaving South Africa is to keep moving forward, or at least keep moving, not always sure of the direction. The way the story moves forward and these quotes signify the presence of South Africa itself as a living, breathing nation that changes with time, just like the Swartz family and just like life. It's a masterful storytelling and a great character study. I highly recommend this. I give this a 4.75. What do you think? Are you gonna read it? Did I miss anything? Leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it.